because there is not a shred of evidence in favor of the Judeo-Christian God.
This rare find was discovered just 50 meters south of the Temple Mount, inside a Byzantine structure that dates back to the 6th century of the Common Era. It's a magnificent collection of fine Byzantine jewelry, coins, and a large medallion with Jewish symbols. Most of it is made of pure gold. The collection had most likely been carefully packed and hidden by a prominent group of Jews during the Persian conquest of Jerusalem at the beginning of the 7th century CE. Just like the massive stones King Solomon used to build his royal complex, this newly discovered treasure of precious jewels and rare coins, after being buried in the earth for 14 centuries, revives a riveting and powerful testimony from a long-forgotten chapter in the 3,000-year-old history of Jewish Jerusalem.
This coin got larger and larger and larger, and seems very special. And as we continued and saw that this is a shining, huge gold coin that seems to be medallion and very clear symbol, 7 candles, 7 bunch menorah on this medallion. And it was very shining, like, yesterday. This is the nature of gold. And you can see very clearly the shofar and on the one side and a Torah scroll on the other side. And this is very unique, very special. I myself never saw such a medallion. I don't think that there is any such a medallion ever found in any excavations known. And but especially in Israel, we don't know. Usually a Torah scroll is not a regular symbol. And of course shofar it is, and 7 candles is, but to find such a symbol as a hoard hidden just 50 meters south of the Temple Mount, this was very special. And of course connecting the hoard itself to Jewish people, very clear Jewish symbols, and of course gives it a very clear date, as we have the coins relating to the Byzantine period, and the latest coin gives the latest date possible, which is the earliest date possible, which is the beginning of the 7th century, which is implying very clearly that we are talking about the Persian conquest of Jerusalem that was in 614. And at that time, we know of very strong connections between the Jewish people and the Persians, who gave them promises to come back to Jerusalem, inhabited and rebuild Jerusalem as a Jewish city, things they couldn't have done for so many centuries.
This is the ancient site of Jericho. Jericho is where the Bible says the walls came tumbling down. In the 1930s, archaeologist John Garstang dug here, followed by the work of his colleague Kathleen Kenyon in the 1950s. Garstang concluded that the archaeological evidence he found here matched the biblical account. But Kenyon said no. She said that at the time the Bible says the Israelites attacked Jericho, there was neither a city nor even walls here at the time.
There's no archaeological evidence in Jericho.
The wall is Middle Bronze Age and has nothing to do with the Late Bronze Age. It has nothing to do with the coming of the Israelites.
If you go to Jericho, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. Problem, there's no wall.
Who established that dating for Jericho? Was it
Kathleen Kenyon, who excavated there.
Okay.
What you have to do is look at the evidence, analyze the evidence, and come to your conclusion based on the evidence, not what an authority figure says, not what the majority opinion is. You have to just put that out of your mind and just look at the evidence and come to your conclusion based on what the evidence tells you.
So is the story of the walls falling down at Jericho history or myth? See for yourselves here on Expedition Bible. These two archaeologists, Dr. Parr and Dr. Wood, come from radically different viewpoints.
And religion is the belief of the faith. I don't happen to be very religious.
Yes, I would believe what the Bible says, take it literally.
Despite their differences, let's begin with what these archaeologists do agree about regarding Jericho.
So really amongst scholars there isn't any debate on that this actually is the site of Jericho.
No.
Well, there's no question but what this is Jericho. Nobody disputes that at all. So this is the site that the Bible is telling us about.
I don't think there's any, no one as far as I know has ever argued that this is not biblical Jericho.
The thing to understand about Jericho is that it is a tell. Behind me here is what archaeologists today call a tell. Today, through excavation, they know this is where people lived, this is where ancient cities were. So, I mean, to help us understand a tell, I mean, could you kind of look at it as a cake?
A layer cake.
A layered cake.
Yes, many, many layers.
I think of a nice jam sponge cake that my wife makes. Very nice.
So we are making a cake to better understand a tell, and just like a tell, a cake is made up of different layers.
And a city would be abandoned or destroyed, and then they would come onto the ruins and they would build another city over the top, and then another one over a long period of time. Different cities would be built on top of each other until you have these unnatural looking hills like this, today called a tell. This is an example of one that has never been excavated.
And when you begin to dig into this tell, you go down through it layer by layer as you get down to the earlier and earlier and earlier cultures.
Just as we can now cut open our cake to expose the inner structure of our cake, so archaeologists dig into a tell to expose the inner structure of the layer system within a tell.
That's a very good description, except archaeology is not a piece of cake. It's a lot of hard work. As we excavate the material from the tell, however, it is silent. Very rarely will you find a written document that's going to tell you who lived here, when they lived here, why they abandoned their city, why their city was destroyed.
Archaeologists can't answer that sort of question. We see what's happened, but the why happened is sometimes very difficult.
So you have to depend on written text, historical records, to interpret what you're digging up in that tell.
Dr. Randall Price excavates at Qumran, across from cave number 4, where many ancient fragments of Old Testament scrolls were found.
These 2,200-year-old texts that were discovered here in cave number 4 were hand-copied from even earlier manuscripts, and they are our best source for what happened at Jericho in the ancient past. So this is cave number 4.
This is cave number 4. Yeah, right out of this very section came sections of the book of Joshua, the sections we have from Qumran.
And so how important do you think it is to use the biblical text and the archaeology that's been done at Jericho to interpret what's been found there?
Well, it's extremely important because, one, it's an historical document.
Really, the only ancient text that you have to work with for here is the biblical text, right?
Biblical text, yes, yes.
We have no other references to Jericho outside the Bible.
And no other Old Testament book has more historical information about Jericho than the book of Joshua. In regards to Jericho, it is important for us to understand that the book of Joshua is our only voice from the ancient past that speaks of what happened there over 3,000 years ago.
The Bible's an ancient text. And the book of Joshua is an ancient text, and so we know the story in the book of Joshua is an ancient account. So when the archaeologists excavated at Jericho, did they find evidence that matched that text or not?
In 1907, a German team began the first major excavation work at Jericho.
They were able to trace around the outside perimeter of the tell the lower retaining wall that holds in place the earthen embankment around the tell.
This short section of stone wall can still be seen at Tel Jericho today. But what was the purpose of a retaining wall like this one?
When I pour this bucket of dirt out, it spreads out across a flat ground. However, if I make a circle of stones and I pour the bucket of dirt into it, then the dirt is retained by the stone wall surrounding it.
This is the stone retaining wall which held in place the earthen embankment that surrounded the city, and on top of the stone retaining wall was the mud brick wall.
On top of this stone foundational retaining wall, there was another wall, the city wall, which was made out of mud bricks.
The three teams that dug Jericho were the German team from 1907 to 1909, John Garstang in the 1930s and Kathleen Kenyon in the 1950s. Using the excavation reports from these three digs, we were able to reconstruct what the city of Jericho would have looked like in the time of Joshua. Both the stone wall and the mud brick wall on top of it made up the outer wall that surrounded the city. Further up the embankment was another mud brick wall.
And so as the Israelites were marching on the outside here where we are, this is what they were looking at. This stone facing wall, this big high mud brick wall, the embankment, another mud brick wall up on top. And so as they marched around, they must have been thinking, how are we going to capture this city? Because it's so strongly fortified.